Hi everyone, this is my first attempt at a voice narration for one of my demos, and what better way to kick it off than with a Wonder Woman face cake. I hope you like it and give it a go. So I started by sketching out an image that I liked. This was from a cartoon that I'd seen a long time ago, and sort of thought this was quite a nice one because it was quite clean shapes and lines and not too difficult. And as this was my first try, I didn't want nothing too complex. So cut out the outline of the cake, as you can see I'm doing here. Then take the cake that you're using. I used just a Madeira cake as this was quite a close crumb. Place the template on and cut around the main edge of the cake. When that was done, I then used my buttercream recipe and created a dam around the outside of the first layer of cake, and then filled the middle with jam, basically making it a big Victoria sponge, which is my favourite flavour. Then cover the top of the jam with the buttercream and spread it out a little, and then when that's complete, place your second layer of cake over the top. When that was finished, I just popped that in the fridge for 5 minutes while I got on with the cake board. For the cake board, I used just normal red fondant that was already pre-dyed, rolled it out to the size of the cake board, and then I missed it on here, but I just literally laid it on the cake board with some water on it, and then I used a crunched up bit of tin foil and made some texture on the actual board as I wanted it to look a little bit battered and beaten. I then painted on some edible black dust to make it look even more worn, and just randomly squidged it around everywhere and kept making brush marks until I was happy with the final result. Once the cake had been in the fridge for the 5 minutes, I then gave it a crumb coat of the buttercream. As you can see at that point, I just smoothed over a bit that was a little too much of a tiny detail really, and that would have been way too hard to fondant in that little tiny gap for me anyway. So I just covered that over with buttercream, and you'll see later that I texture anyway. It then went into the fridge for another 5 minutes, came out and gave it its final layer of buttercream, which was a bit thicker, this one. Now this bit should have been done at the beginning, but I totally forgot. But basically here you can see me cutting out the shape of the cake onto a cake board, which was a really hard cake board to cut. This should have been done at the beginning and should have had the cake put on it to start with, but didn't. So I'd definitely recommend doing that. But as you can see, I mean, I transferred it over and it worked out okay anyway, but it was just a little step that wasn't necessary. So yeah, take my advice, don't make my mistake. I then rolled out some black fondant and covered the entire cake in it, as this was going to be the main colour, black being her hair colour, and then smoothed down the edges by just pulling them out very slightly. Once that was done, I cut away any excess black fondant. I wasn't too concerned about getting it mega neat at the bottom, as I knew I was going to be covering that. The next step is to cut out the face and also her, I don't know, would you call it crown or band across the top of her forehead. So that's what I done next, as that was the shape I needed. I then placed the template of the hair back onto the cake and traced where the face shape was going to be, and that's when I began to add sort of a few lines and texture to her hair. Not too much, as this is more cartoony than anything, but just enough to give it a bit of movement. And I just used some of my fondant tools for that. But you can use the end of a little paintbrush or something, or a toothpick, or even the back of a butter knife would do the job, and your fingers. Then placed the face back on and traced around where the eyes were going to be, and I pushed them down slightly to create a little bit of a socket. Then I used some, I think this was ivory coloured fondant, but you choose whatever fondant you want to do the actual face. So I cut round the face. First I just marked it because I find it easier to do that, and then cut out afterwards with the X-Acto knife. Okay, that I stuck down with a little bit of water in the space where we'd made the outline for the face. Then I smushed the edges down a little bit, just to make it try and tuck behind the, well, look like it was tucked behind the hair a little bit, so it wasn't just plonked on the top. But you work on this as much or as little as you want. Next was the turn of the eyes, and again I just create some marks where they were going to be using the template, cut out the eyes from the template and stuck them down with a little water. And this is obvious, it's the outline of the mouth. I'd cut that out from the template. And this tiny little bit is going to be her teeth, and it just needs to go inside to cover where the lips are going to be. And again, same idea with the eyebrows, just outline where they are using your template. And then I rolled out little bits of black fondant sausages and sort of tapered them down at one end, and added a little water to stick them down. And then I used my tool just to tidy them up, my little fondant tool, just to tidy them up a little. I then used a circle cutter, and I'd cut out the eyes just to give me an impression of where I wanted the actual eyes to be placed, the actual pupils and the actual outer eye. And I then used a blue food dye and painted those on, so I found that easier than cutting out a little piece of blue fondant, and it makes it look a little bit more lifelike. And then these were tiny little bits of black fondant rolled out and pushed on for the pupils. And this was the hardest bit, because my hands aren't made for tiny work, but this is rolled out very thin black fondant, and then placed around the eye. I guess that would be her eyeliner. This is a really thin bit. I later used a thicker bit as I sort of thought that looked a bit better. So you'll see that change in a moment. I then highlighted the eyes with a little white dot of edible white paint, just to give it a little sparkle. And then for the nose, I made an impression by cutting along the nose line of the template, and then just using the tool to sort of emboss where it was gonna go. For the lips, I cut out the mouth and created some really red sausages and placed them round where the impression of the mouth had gone, and just sort of fiddled with that a bit until it looked sort of quite okay. It looked quite bright, I thought, but again, it was cartoony, so I think it worked okay. Okay, next up was her golden band. I cut around some yellow fondant. I made that a little bit thicker than perhaps the others, the other detail work, just so it stood out a bit on her forehead. Tidied it up a bit and placed it on with a little bit of water, and then just patted it down so it looked as though it was wrapped around a bit more. And this is just making a slight impression of where the star should be. I then used some edible gold paint to highlight and paint the actual sort of crown part of her head. And it was a really nice finish on this particular one. This one you had to, it was dust and you mixed with some lemon juice or alcohol, and it covered really well. This again I just used where I'd outlined for the star and cut out the star for her crown, and the same for her little silver earring, which I then painted with a little silver edible paint as well. I then used a fondant extruder to push out some sort of worms of black fondant, which I was then going to place around the edge of the hair. That again tidies, a nice quick way of tidying up the base of where the fondant finished, and just made it look a bit nicer. I then had an even thinner piece of black fondant and highlighted the details. So in this case, the star, the crown, and then I went on to do the nose and nostrils as well, and the little earring. I added a bit more detail with an edible black pen on the crown. I keep saying crown, I'm sure someone will tell me what it really is. And to finish it off, I dusted some of the black edible dust on her lips and crown, and just a little bit of shading around her eye area and inner ear, and I think that really helped to give it a little pop. And finally, to finish the cake board, I used the extruder, and it was sort of like a clover I guess effect, and I pushed out some yellow fondant, twisted it to make it look like a lasso, and then placed that on the edging of the cake board with a little bit of water, and finished it off by painting it with the gold. Okay, and that's it. You'll see in the next picture a little Wonder Woman symbol. I made that out of fondant as well, and just placed that down on the corner. I think she turned out okay. It's not bad for a first attempt, and I hope you like it and picked up some tips. Thanks ever so much for watching. Bye!